I was talking to a friend recently who works in early childhood education, and she described a shift she's noticed in her classroom, not in the curriculum, but in the silence. She mentioned a young boy who used to draw superheroes, but lately his drawings have changed. Now he draws men in tactical gear standing outside of houses.
Wow.
He isn't drawing the bad guys. He's drawing the people who are supposed to be the protectors. We often tell ourselves that children don't see the adult world, that they are shielded from the complexities of national policy or enforcement strategies.
We like to think that.
But then you see the footage they're scrolling through on their phones between school shifts, vivid, shaky clips of a mother shot at point-blank range during an icy operation. Or the story of a nurse, a woman whose entire life is dedicated to healing, being beaten with pistols by 6 federal officers and shot 11 times simply because she tried to help a victim on the pavement.
It's unavoidable.
And there's a specific, heavy kind of stillness that settles over a community when these images move from the screen to the street. You start to notice a transformation in the neighborhood.
So?
It's in the way people glance at unfamiliar cars, or how conversations at the dinner table abruptly stop when a child enters the room. We treat these moments as isolated tragedies or necessary enforcement. But when you step back, a different pattern emerges. The militarized presence in quiet suburbs and the maximizing of public disruption start to feel less like a logistics plan and more like a performance. It's a strategy we've seen before in history, a gradual normalization of intimidation, where cruelty begins to feel administrative and silence begins to feel like the only safe option.
It becomes the new normal.
It's the moment when fear stops being an emotion and starts being a policy. And it leaves you with this haunting question. When we allow fear to become the primary language our children hear, what kind of world are we teaching them to build?
And if fear has become the teacher who is actually running the classroom.
Exactly. Who is running the classroom? That question, it really gets under your skin, doesn't it?
It does. Because on the surface, we think we know the answer. The teacher runs the classroom, the parents run the home, the mayor runs the town, the official structures.
Right. We have these org charts in our heads of how society is supposed to work, of who is in charge of what.
But that silence your friend described, that stillness where a child stops drawing Superman and starts drawing tactical units, that suggests the org chart has changed. Or maybe that it was never what we thought it was.
That something else has entered the room.
Something else has entered the room. And I think, if we're being really honest with ourselves, we feel that same shift in our own lives too.
Absolutely.
We feel it in the office when a meeting suddenly goes quiet because someone used a word that was fine last week but isn't this week. We feel it at the dinner table with family when we hesitate to bring up a news story, not because it's controversial, but because we don't know the right way to talk about it anymore.
It's like there is a third person in every conversation now, an invisible auditor, just sort of judging your every word.
An invisible auditor. And that is exactly what we need to unpack today. This is the real mission of this deep dive. We're moving from that visceral, powerful opening image of the classroom into a much wider investigation.
We're trying to map the invisible structures.
Exactly. The ones that are reshaping not just our politics, but the American psyche itself. Because this isn't just about politics in the sense of who you vote for. It goes deeper. It's about the fundamental wiring of our social fabric.
And to do that, we've pulled together a stack of sources that, quite frankly, is a bit of a strange dinner party. We're sitting distinct, sometimes conflicting worldviews right next to each other to see where they overlap, where they might be describing the same phenomenon from different angles.
We're going to be synthesizing concepts from Christopher Lasch's The Culture of Narcissism, which is a book that I think a lot of people think they know, but usually get wrong.
Right. They hear narcissism and they think selfies.
And it's so much more than that. We've got Emil Durkheim, one of the fathers of sociology, to talk about this concept of anomie. We have Hans Hermann Hoppe, who gives us a very sharp, let's say, unflinching libertarian critique of the state and the intelligentsia.
And then to balance that, we have Henry A. Giroux's work on neoliberalism and what he calls the war machine, along with Hendrik Enroth on this modern crisis of authority.
So you have the hard right, the academic left, and classical sociology all in one room.
And the mission is to analyze 3 very specific stories, 3 vignettes, really through these different lenses. We have the story of an architect, a mother, and a neighborhood.
3 crime scenes, essentially, which sounds dramatic, but I mean it in a sociological sense. Not legal crimes, but social crimes. Places where the bond between people or between a person and their reality was broken.
And the central thesis we're sort of testing here is that fear, combined with this abandonment of objective standards and the rise of what you might call a therapeutic mindset, is dissolving our ability to act. It's creating a crisis of agency.
A crisis of agency, which is, a kind of academic way of saying we are forgetting how to be the authors of our own lives. We're becoming characters in a story someone else is writing.
I want to start with this first section, which we've titled The Collapse of Merit and the Rise of Structural Anxiety. And we are anchoring this whole idea in the story of a man, an architect named Elias.
Yes.
So Elias is an architect based in Virginia. He's in his mid-50s. And this is a guy who has spent his entire life in a world of hard lines and physics. In architecture, there is no my truth or your truth.
Right. There's gravity.
There's gravity. There are load-bearing walls. If you calculate the stress on a beam incorrectly, the roof collapses. Period. It's not a suggestion.
It's a binary world. It works or it fails. There's no in between.
Exactly. And he finds a lot of comfort and meaning in that.
Yeah.
He genuinely believes that the best design wins. It's a pure meritocracy in his mind.
The rules are clear.
The rules are clear. The goals are clear. So he takes on this young intern, let's call her Sarah, and he mentors her for 6 months. He teaches her everything he knows, watches her skills just blossom. And when a senior design position opens up, he champions her. He puts her forward. Her portfolio is, by all his metrics, technically flawless.
So he expects the system to work the way it always has. Skill plus hard work equals reward.
Right. He's followed the formula his whole life, but then the firm hires someone from the outside, a candidate whose portfolio is, by every objective metric Elias knows, significantly weaker.
Weaker how?
The designs are derivative, the structural understanding is thin. It's just not at the same level. But this other candidate has a very specific social narrative, their cover letter, their interview. It's filled with all the right buzzwords about equity and decolonizing space and social justice, all aligning perfectly with the firm's new corporate ideology.
So it's a narrative hire.
It's a narrative hire. And Elias has to sit there and watch this happen.
That must have been infuriating.
Well, it was worse than that. He doesn't just watch it, he has to validate it. He sits in the partner meeting and he has to listen to them explain why the weaker candidate is actually the better fit for the firm's new mission.
They're reframing reality in front of him.
And I saw a video interview with this guy, with Elias, recounting this. And the look in his eyes, it wasn't just anger, it was vertigo.
Vertigo?
He looked like a man who had reached for a handrail that he's grabbed 1,000 times before. And this time his hand just went through smoke. He said he felt like the North Star of merit, the one thing that guided his whole career, had just been turned off.
What you are describing there, that vertigo, that sense of the floor just dropping out from under you, is a textbook, almost perfect example of what Emile Durkheim, a century ago, called anomie.
Because I feel like it's a word people throw around, but they use it to just mean like chaos or feeling sad and disconnected.
It's so much more specific and I think more terrifying than that. Durkheim defined anomie as a state of normlessness or deregulation. But to really get it, you have to think about humans as feedback loops.
Yeah.
We are fundamentally wired for cause and effect. If I plant a seed, a crop grows. If I work hard, I achieve a goal. If I treat my neighbor with respect, he generally treats me with respect. If I develop a real tangible skill, I get the job.
The contract. The unspoken social contract.
Yes, the implicit social contract. It's the source of our stability. Anomie is what happens when society or an institution within it breaks that feedback loop. It's when the rules no longer bind the actors effectively. Or, and this is the key part for Elias, when following the rules is no longer beneficial.
The cause no longer leads to the expected effect.
Exactly. Elias followed the rules to the letter. Work hard, build good things, mentor the best person, get rewarded with a good outcome. The firm broke the loop. They said, actually, the rules are now about political narrative, not about structural integrity.
Isn't that just life? Sometimes the boss's nephew gets the job. Unfairness and cronyism have always existed. Why is this specific thing, this anomie, so different?
That's a great question, and it's the critical distinction. The difference is scale and, more importantly, legitimacy.
Okay.
If the boss hires his idiot nephew, everyone in the office knows what it is. They call it nepotism. It is a corruption of the existing rule, but the rule itself, the ideal of merit, still exists in everyone's mind. They know the system was violated.
So they can be angry at the violation, but they still believe in the system underneath it all.
But in Elias's case, the firm isn't admitting that it's corruption. They are claiming this is the new morality. They are redefining merit itself. They're saying the nephew is the better candidate because he checks these other boxes that we have just invented.
So they aren't just breaking the rule, they are incinerating it and writing a new one in its place.
They are incinerating the rule book itself. And Durkheim argues that the psychological toll of this is what he calls derangement. It's a strong word, but what he means is that when there are no clear limits or goals that you can trust, human desire becomes insatiable and anxiety becomes chronic. Well, if merit doesn't define success anymore, then what does? Is it your popularity? Is it knowing the right buzzwords this month? Is it the secret, unspoken whim of the HR department? Is it the mob on social media?
You never know where you stand. There's no solid ground.
You can never, ever relax. You are constantly scanning the horizon for the next shift in the political wind. It's not just stressful, it's a permanent state of structural anxiety that grinds you down.
This connects directly to what Henrik Enroth has been writing about with the whole post-truth era, because usually when we talk about post-truth, we're talking about, fake news or politicians lying on Twitter.
Right, we frame it as an information problem. Facts versus lies. But Enroth argues that's a misunderstanding of what's really happening. He says, post-truth isn't really about facts. It's about a fundamental crisis of authority.
A crisis of authority?
Yes. Authority in a healthy society is built on promises. Yeah. The promise that if you get a degree, you'll have a shot at a decent career. The promise that the doctor is actually trying to heal you. The promise that the architect is building a safe house. The promise that the justice system is blind.
And when those promises are broken?
The ties that bind society undo themselves. Enron calls this the broken promise mechanism. Elias is living through a broken promise. The institution, his firm, promised that merit matters. They broke that promise. So now Elias doesn't just doubt that one hiring decision.
He starts to doubt the validity of the entire institution.
The entire thing. It's an epistemological crisis. If I can't trust the firm to judge a simple architectural drawing, why should I trust them on my salary, on my safety, on anything they say?
And if you can't trust the firm, and you read that you can't trust the media, and you hear you can't trust the university, you eventually just retreat into a state of total disbelief.
You stop trusting the testimony of others entirely, and society cannot function without that trust.
Which brings us to the really difficult question of why. Why is this shift happening? Why would a successful architecture firm choose to move away from a proven model like merit toward this narrative-based system? And this is where we have to bring in Hans Hermann Hoppe.
And a warning for everyone, the man does not pull punches. His analysis is sharp and, for many, very uncomfortable.
No, he doesn't. He has a very specific structural explanation for this. He argues there is a functional, unspoken alliance between the state and what he calls the intelligentsia.
Right. So for Hoppe, the state, the ruling elite, always, by its nature, wants to expand its power. That's its prime directive. But it can't just do it with brute force all the time. That's too expensive. It's dangerous. It creates martyrs.
It needs legitimacy. It needs intellectual cover.
It needs the appearance of consent. So they need the academics and the media and the thought leaders to stand up and say, this expansion of power, this new regulation, this is for your own good. It is the moral thing to do.
So they need the storytellers.
And Hoppe argues that the intelligentsia, and here he includes not just university professors and journalists, but crucially for Elias's story, the HR departments, the DEI consultants, the corporate administrators, they are the ones who provide this cover. And they do it by promoting what he calls egalitarian doctrines.
How does an egalitarian doctrine, something that sounds good like equality, end up helping the state expand its power? Intuitive.
It's the core of his argument. Hoppe says that the natural order of things, if left alone, is based on production, competence, and voluntary association. Some people are just better architects than others. Some are better farmers. That creates a natural hierarchy based on skill and reputation, a natural elite.
And the state sees this as a threat.
As a competitor, because if people respect the master architect more than the mayor, the state's authority is weakened. So the intelligentsia comes in and creates a new basis for hierarchy. A political order based not on competence, but on categories of victimhood and the need for redistribution.
So they essentially replace the natural elite, the people who are good at building things, with the political elite, the people who are good at aligning with the state's narrative.
And Hoppe is very blunt. He calls these egalitarian doctrines nonsense. He's a very staunch critic. He believes this alliance allows the state to dismantle the natural hierarchies that exist in a community like Wariat, the respect for a master craftsman like Elias, and replace them with a new hierarchy of political compliance. The person who is best at reciting the ideology is now at the top.
So for Elias, it's not just that he lost a battle over a promotion. He is being signaled that his entire way of being, his whole value system, is obsolete.
He is being told that his production-based value is no longer the currency of the realm. The new currency is narrative compliance. And according to Hoppe, that systematically alienates the most productive and competent citizens. It leaves them feeling anomic, rootless, powerless, and deeply, deeply angry.
That is a heavy analysis. But it makes perfect sense of that look in his eyes. It's not just disappointment in a single event. It's the realization that he is playing a game that no longer exists.
And that feeling of vertigo, that sense that the rules have been incinerated, isn't just happening at work. It's happening in the most private space of all. It's happening at home.
Which pivots us perfectly to our second vignette. We are calling this section the therapeutic state and the erosion of resilience.
This is where that structural anxiety we were just talking about, this is where it meets the family.
So let's talk about this mother in Seattle. I read this account she gave, and it was just heartbreaking because she sounded so unsure of herself, so hesitant. She has a 7-year-old son, just a normal, high-energy little boy. He comes home from school one day, and he's crying.
Okay, what happened? Was he bullied?
Well, that's the thing. Nothing happened in the traditional sense. He wasn't punched. He wasn't called a name. He fell down while wrestling with a friend at recess. Just normal roughhousing. Kids being kids.
Sure.
But the teacher, who is working under a very strict, new, trauma-informed curriculum, pulled him aside. And she didn't just say, hey, be careful. She told him that his desire to play rough was a sign of internalized aggression.
Internalized aggression.
He's 7 years old. He was playing tag. That's a clinical diagnosis.
The language matters so much. Down, she used a clinical pathological term. And the boy, being 7, he internalized that. He came home genuinely believing there was something wrong with his brain, that he was aggressive and bad.
And what did the mother do? What was her instinct?
Her instinct, she said, was to hug him and tell him to toughen up a bit. To say, honey, you were just playing, shake it off. Boys wrestle, okay. But she didn't. She stopped herself.
She said she felt the therapeutic state breathing down her neck. She was genuinely terrified that if she used the wrong vocabulary, if she didn't validate the school's trauma narrative, she would be flagged by the administration as a problem parent, or worse, an unsafe one.
That hesitation right there, that single moment where she censors her own parental instinct, that is the victory of the system.
She felt like she couldn't parent her own child because she didn't have the credentials. The teacher with the certificate was the expert, not her.
This is the perfect entry point into Christopher Lasch's The Culture of Narcissism. And I have to stop us here because narcissism is one of those words that has been completely ruined by the internet.
Yeah, we think it means, being arrogant or taking a lot of selfies or loving yourself too much.
We think of this mega ego. But Lasch, writing back in the 70s, meant the exact opposite. He defined pathological narcissism not as a strong self, but as a weak self, a fragile, minimal, empty self.
Wait, so the narcissist isn't the guy who thinks he's great?
No. According to Lasch, the pathological narcissist is the person who has no internal core, no stable sense of self-worth. So they require constant, unending validation from the outside just to feel real. It's not an expression of, I am the best. It's a desperate plea of, please tell me I exist.
The profound dependency.
It is total dependency. And Lasch argues that our entire society has engineered a shift away from a culture of character toward a culture of personality.
Okay, what's the difference between character and personality in his view?
Character is internal. It's who you are when no one is looking. It's made of things like integrity, stoicism, duty, resilience. It's Elias checking the math on the blueprint for the 10th time, even though no one will ever know. It's built through hardship.
And personality.
Personality is entirely external. It's about how you are perceived by others. It's being liked. It's having the right vibe. It's your personal brand. It's a performance for an audience.
So how does this whole shift from character to personality connect back to the mother in Seattle?
Lasch argues that society has systematically and intentionally transferred the authority of child-rearing from the family to a class of experts. Doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, guidance counselors, and now trauma-informed teachers.
The caring professions.
Exactly. And the mother in Seattle hesitates because she has been subtly convinced for years that she is not qualified to understand her own son's soul. Only the expert with the certificate and the clinical vocabulary can do that.
She's been de-skilled in her own home. She's been made to feel like an amateur in the most essential human task.
And the result is that we stop treating normal behavioral issues like wrestling too hard as character issues that need instruction and discipline. Hey, be gentle with your friend. Instead, we treat them as medical pathologies that need therapy. You have internalized aggression.
And when you medicalize normal childhood, when you pathologize things like playing rough, what does that do to the child over time?
Well, this is where Christine Rosen's work, Updating Lash, is so important. She talks about the overpraised American, and she references this concept of hothouse parenting.
Right, keeping kids in a bubble.
We're creating an environment that is so controlled, so monitored, so scheduled, and so emotionally safe that the child never develops a psychological immune system. They never face a challenge they can't handle, so they never learn that they can handle things.
Rosen talks about creating praise addicts, right?
Yes, and it's such a paradox. We think constant praise builds self-esteem, but what it actually does, especially unearned praise, good job for showing up, everyone gets a trophy, is create profound anxiety.
Because the child knows it's fake.
The child knows deep down they haven't actually achieved anything, so they become addicted to the external validation, the words from the authority figure. The praise is like a drug, and when it's withdrawn or replaced with criticism, they crumble.
So when the teacher says that's aggression, the kid just completely falls apart because he has no internal character to fall back on to say, no, wait, I know who I am. I was just playing.
He has no defense.
Yeah.
He has what Lash would call a narcissistic defense structure. He is a hollow shell that needs the environment to be perfectly soft and affirming at all times. Otherwise, he cracks. Protection becomes suffocation.
You know, this reminds me of the whole HSP phenomenon, the highly sensitive person. Now, people putting HSP in their social media bios like a badge of honor.
It's the modern version of what the Victorians called neurasthenia. In that era, wealthy women who couldn't handle the stress of modern life would take to their fainting couches. It was a sign of delicate breeding. Today, we have trigger warnings and the HSP label.
We're reframing fragility.
We're reframing fragility not as something to overcome, but as a special, almost superior identity trait that the world has a duty to accommodate.
So instead of the old American ideal of rugged individualism, we now have... What's the new ideal?
Lash calls it the quivering sentimental self, a self that is constantly taking its own emotional temperature. Safe? Do I feel validated? Am I comfortable? And if the answer to any of those is no, the response isn't, I need to get stronger. It's, the system needs to change to protect me.
And the tragedy for that mother in Seattle is that she knows this is happening. She can see her son being molded into this quivering self. But the institution, the school, the therapeutic state has seized the moral high ground. If she fights back, she's the one who is labeled unsafe.
And that is a terrifying, powerless place for a parent to be, when the language of safety becomes a weapon used to strip you of your most basic authority and instinct.
So we have the architect, Elias, losing his agency to a political narrative that redefines reality. We have the mother losing her agency to a therapeutic expert class that redefines her child. Now let's widen the lens one more time to the community, the neighborhood.
Section 3, the dissolution of social bonds and the politics of division.
This story. It's smaller in scale than the others, but in a way it's almost sadder. It's about a neighborhood block party that didn't happen.
Okay, what stopped it?
Well, this was in a small town, a place that had been tight-knit for decades. The kind of place where people have keys to each other's houses, where you borrow a cup of sugar, real community. But then, the machine of national identity politics, mostly driven by legacy media and academic theories, trickled down.
Where did it land first?
It always lands in the local Facebook group. That seems to be where organic community goes to die.
It's a digital town square, and it's a minefield.
So, two neighbors, let's call them Bob and Steve. They had been best friends for years, golfing buddies, their kids grew up together. Solid. Then Stuck posted something in the group questioning a new academic framework being introduced at the local high school. He wasn't being nasty or aggressive, he just asked a simple question. Is this really the best way to teach our kids history?
A perfectly reasonable civic question. The kind of thing neighbors should discuss.
In 1990, maybe, or even 2010. Today, Bob, his best friend, who considers himself a passionate ally to certain causes, didn't see a question from his friend Steve. He saw an attack from an oppressor. He saw a problematic viewpoint.
He saw a political category, not a person.
Exactly. He publicly called Steve out, labeled him problematic. They stopped speaking. The argument spread like a virus through the group. The tension became so thick that the annual block party was quietly canceled because half the street wouldn't be willing to eat a hot dog with the other half.
This wasn't the FBI coming in and arresting Steve for his thought crime.
It was a betrayal. The institutions, the media, the academy had successfully convinced Bob that betraying his lifelong friend was not just acceptable, but was actually a moral act, that his loyalty to the abstract cause was more important, more virtuous than his loyalty to his actual neighbor.
This brings us right back to Hans Hermann Hoppe, but also, surprisingly, to the leftist thinker Henry Giroux, because they both predict this exact outcome just for very different reasons.
Okay, let's start with Hoppe's divide et impera.
Divide and conquer. It's an old strategy. Hoppe argues that the state has a vested structural interest in destroying what he calls organic social bonds.
What's an organic bond?
It's any bond that doesn't depend on the state for its existence. Your family, your church group, your bowling league, your friendship with Steve across the street, these are the things that make up civil society.
And if you and Steve are friends, you rely on each other. You have social capital. You are strong together.
You're resilient. You don't need the police to settle a minor dispute about a tree branch. You talk over the fence. You don't need a government program to help you if your basement floods. Your neighbors show up with buckets.
And Hoppe argues these horizontal bonds are a threat to the state's vertical power.
A direct threat. So the state, through its allies in the intelligentsia, actively works to dissolve them. And the most effective way to do that is to create a caste system of victimhood. They slice and dice the population into categories. Bob, you are in Group A. Steve, you are in Group B. And by the way, Group B has historically oppressed Group A.
So they weaponize the differences, even minor ones, and turn them into existential conflicts.
They turn neighbors into enemies. Because if Bob hates Steve, Bob is now isolated. He has no one to rely on. And an isolated, atomized individual is weak and afraid. So who does he turn to for protection and meaning?
The state.
The state. The state breaks the community in order to create customers for its own power and services. That is the core of the Hoppian view.
Okay, that's one lens. But now you said Henry Giroux, who is coming from the far left, gets to a similar place.
Fascinating. Giroux would obviously despise Hoppe's libertarian conclusions, but his analysis of the mechanism is almost identical. Giroux argues that neoliberalism, this all-encompassing market ideology, has destroyed the very concept of the public good. It has turned all of politics and society into a brutal war machine.
And he talks about the politics of disposability.
Right. For Giroux, the market-based system treats entire classes of people as disposable, as human waste or excess. He is usually talking about the poor or minorities or immigrants. But let's apply his framework to Steve.
Steve questioned the dominant narrative.
Therefore, in the eyes of the new moral economy that Bob has adopted, Steve is now disposable. He is human waste. He is to be cast out of the community. The logic is the same.
And Giroux talks about depoliticization, which always sounded weird to me because everything feels hyper-political right now.
That's the brilliant paradox in his work. Giroux argues that we are radically depoliticized because we have stopped engaging in real, collective, democratic, action-like organizing a block party or running a town hall meeting. Instead, we have retreated into what he calls private orbits of fear and consumerism.
So politics becomes a spectator sport.
It's a spectacle. It's a consumer choice. We consume outrage on Fox News or MSNBC. We buy the candidate's hat, we put the sign in our yard, but we don't actually build anything with our neighbors.
We treat politics like a football game. My team versus your team. And if you aren't on my team, you are my enemy and I can't even speak to you.
Giroux calls it a war of all against all. It's the ultimate survival of the fittest mentality, but applied to culture and ideology. And the result is atomization. So whether you blame the welfare state like Hoppe or late-stage capitalism like Giroux, the destination is the same. You are alone in your house, afraid of your neighbor, scrolling on your phone for the latest outrage.
And that loneliness, that feeling of being cast out, that's what Clara Sandlin talks about with The Left Behind, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sandlin studies populism in Europe, but it applies here perfectly. She argues that the political anger we see, the Steve versus Bob fight, it isn't just about economics or taxes, it's about cultural loss.
Or what does she mean by cultural loss?
People like Steve, or the architect, Elias, They feel that they have been evicted from the national culture. They feel that the liberal elite, the people who run the major institutions, don't just disagree with them. They refuse to even recognize them as legitimate members of the conversation. They feel invisible, or worse, scorned.
They've lost their status as good people. Their common sense is now called bigotry.
And when you deny an entire group of people recognition and status, they don't just vanish. They retreat into defensive, often resentful identities. They stop asking, what kind of society should we build together? And they start asking, who are we and who is against us?
So the identity politics of the right becomes a mirror image, a reaction to the identity politics of the left.
It's a vicious feedback loop of mutual hostility, and the ultimate casualty is the neighborhood. The casualty is that common sense space where we could say, hey, we can disagree about the high school curriculum and still get together for a barbecue on Saturday. That ability, that simple civic grace, is gone.
Okay, we've got these three powerful stories.
We have Elias, the architect. He represents the loss of truth and merit. He is experiencing Durkheim's anomie. The ground itself is moving under his feet.
Then we have the mother in Seattle.
She represents the loss of parental authority and personal resilience. That's the therapeutic state in action. The self is redefined as something inherently fragile that needs expert management.
And finally, the neighborhood.
The neighborhood represents the loss of community and solidarity. That's the atomization that both Hoppe and Giroux describe, even if they blame different culprits.
And if you layer them on top of each other, truth, authority, community, the core pillars of a functioning society, they're all dissolving.
And they are all being replaced by one single thing: fear.
Go back to the very beginning, the opening monologue. The boy who stops drawing superheroes and starts drawing men with guns. The heavy kind of stillness.
That stillness is the sound of a society that is losing its agency.
Agency. That really is the key word that ties all of this together.
Yes, agency is the ability to act meaningfully in the world, to be a cause, not just an effect, to shape your life and your environment.
And each of these stories is a story of lost agency.
Absolutely. When Elias feels the rules are rigged and merit is dead, he loses his agency. Why should he try his hardest? Why mentor the next generation? His actions have become disconnected from outcomes.
And the mother.
When the mother feels she needs an expert to tell her how to raise her own son, she loses her agency. She becomes a passenger in her own family, following the instructions of the caring professionals.
And when the neighborhood is fractured by political animosity, they fear each other.
They lose the collective agency to govern themselves. They stop talking over the fence and start calling the cops or the HOA or Child Protective Services on each other. They outsource their community life to bureaucrats.
We become a nation of dependence.
We become profoundly dependent on the corporation for our social status, dependent on the therapist for our sense of self-worth, dependent on the state for our safety and our morality.
And you mentioned Giroux and the sociologist Segment Bauman too. They talk about this idea of a painless morality.
This is the seductive trap at the end of it all. We still want to feel like we are good people, but we don't want the actual pain and difficulty of moral obligation. Well, loving your actual neighbor is hard, especially if your neighbor is annoying or plays their music too loud or votes differently than you. That requires patience and sacrifice and friction. Posting a black square or a flag emoji on Instagram is easy. It's painless. It gives you the feeling of virtue without the cost.
So we substitute this performance of virtue, what Lasch would call personality, for real morality, for real character.
Or we substitute our allegiance to the state or a political party for it. We think, I don't have to actually help the poor person on my street. I voted for the party that says they have a program to help the poor. It's a way of offloading our personal moral duty onto a vast impersonal structure.
And the structural consequence of all this is, well, you just have to look around.
The consequence is a populace that is, as the sources suggest, chemically dependent. Just look at the skyrocketing Ritalin and antidepressant prescription stats Rosen cites. Psychically fragile, that's Lasch's minimal self in need of constant validation. And socially isolated, that's Hoppe's atomized individual disconnected from his neighbors.
It's a really bleak picture, but I have to ask the cynical question. Is there a utility to this? I mean, who benefits from creating a fragile, lonely, anxious, and dependent population?
Well, if you want to be cynical, and a thinker like Hoppe certainly is, a fearful, lonely population that has lost its agency is a population that is very, very easy to manage.
Because they are all looking for a savior.
They are looking for a parent. If you systematically destroy the organic parents, the family, and the organic community, the neighborhood, the state becomes the only parent left in the room. It steps in and promises to fix the very anxiety that its policies helped to manufacture in the first place.
We will make you safe.
We will make you safe, we will validate you, we will tell you what is true. Just give us your agency, give us your freedom. It's a small price to pay for certainty.
It really leaves you wondering, if we know this is the water we're swimming in, is it even?
You have to see that the silence in the classroom and the silence in the corporate break room and the silence on the neighborhood Facebook group are all the same silence. They come from the same place.
We have walked through the landscape of the architect who lost his metric, the mother who lost her voice, and the neighborhood that lost its bond. We have seen how the machinery of the therapeutic state, the strategy of divide and conquer, and the collapse of authority have left us in a state of vertigo. It is a world where the self is inflated but empty, where the community is discussed constantly but experienced rarely, and where safety is the highest virtue, purchased at the cost of freedom and resilience. We are left looking at a society that has traded the rough, organic friction of human relationships for a sanitized, managed, and ultimately lonely existence, overseen by experts who promise to fix the very anxieties they help to manufacture. It is the realization that the silence in the classroom, the stillness in the neighborhood, and the paralysis in the home are not separate phenomena, but the unified sound of a culture that has forgotten how to breathe on its own.
That is something to think about.
We'll see you next time.